Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is actually our second in-store ticketed event. So we have folks joining us in person, so thank you for coming. And we also have some folks joining us on Zoom as well. So for those of you on Zoom, if there's any kind of audio or visual issues, just pop it in the chat, let us know. We will have someone moderating it. And then for those of you in store, we are having some kind of technical issues with our projector. So you'll see it kind of turn on and off every few minutes or so. So we do apologize. But yeah, we'll just go with the flow. It's going to be okay. It turns back on after about 10 seconds. So yeah, thanks for your patience, and hopefully we'll figure it out for the next event. But yeah, again, thank you everybody for coming. I would like to start off by acknowledging that we are on the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations here, who have been stewards of these lands for and waters for time immemorial. And our head office and design center are located there as well. And we just wanted to let you know that our feature product for tonight is the Nordic LD2. It comes in Gore-Tex and non-Gore-Tex, but you know, for the rainy season, Gore-Tex is always helpful. It's super lightweight, durable, breathable, and all season. We've got really great traction on the soles too. It's a Vibram sole there, and I think Devin is actually wearing them tonight. We have, that's going to be the grand raffle prize at the very end. We are going to do a separate draw tomorrow for those of you who attended on Zoom. So everyone's going to get the chance to win one of these pairs of shoes here, the Nordic LD2. And yeah, so just some housekeeping here. For those of you joining us in store, thank you so much, Straight and Narrow, for bringing some awesome cocktails. We also are having some snacks in store. Hopefully those of you at home have your own kind of drinks and snacks happening there. But for those of you in store, we'll just ask that you stay seated while you're enjoying your refreshments, and keep your mask on when you are not seated. And then for those of you on Zoom, if anything funky happens, we'll just end the meeting and we'll restart it. We'll ask everybody to save their questions until the very end of the presentation. And so we'll have Q&A from both in person, and then if anyone has any questions on Zoom, we'll just ask that you drop your question on the chat there, and then we'll read it out to our speakers at the end. And I think that's everything. For those of you in person, if you need to use the restroom, they're just right across the hall. Someone can let you out. But other than that, yeah, I'm stoked to welcome Devin and Andrea to our store here, and stoked to learn more about injury prevention in general. I myself am a very clumsy person, and so particularly interested to hear about, you know, some ankle and foot mobility. But yeah, I'll let you two introduce yourselves, and yeah, thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Okay. All right, hi guys. How's everyone doing? So this is us. Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a lot of fun. Obviously, Stronger Strides we're presenting through, and Devin and myself actually lived very parallel lives without really knowing it. We both went to school for kinesiology and then went on to study strength and conditioning and opened up our own business specializing in that. I work a little bit more in injury rehab and performance, and Devin works more with elite runners, race walkers, and other athletes. And so when we met a few years ago and started becoming running friends and running partners, we would spend a lot of time on the trails, and we'd also nerd out about exercise science, strength and conditioning. Our friends would ask a lot of questions, and then it really got us realizing that there wasn't a lot of products out there that really educated and provided runners with the tools to set them up with strength training, the know-hows, and whatnot. So that's really how Stronger Strides came about. It was to help us use our tools as a runner, as well as being strength and conditioning coaches and bringing those things together. And really what our mission is to do is to teach runners how to use strength, not only the strength training itself, but how to integrate it into their program or the running program and the performance. So based on the type of runner you are, how often you're running, and your overall race schedule. Today, we invited you here today to talk specifically about injury prevention, which is a pretty easy topic for us to integrate into strength training, because strength training has the benefit of offering injury prevention. Well, a well thought out strength training program naturally offers injury prevention. So when we're looking at when we're talking about injury prevention in general, the things that we want to address are what you want to focus on and the things that you want to avoid, because sometimes the things you need to focus on are just as important as the things that you don't want to focus on. The other things that we're going to talk about are the different types of injuries. So we have acute injuries that if you're clumsier, you might experience, ankle rolls, a trip and fall on your face, on your elbow, on your face, I fell on my elbow, those sorts of things. And then we have something more chronic in nature, which a lot of people experience, such as tendonitis, Achilles tendinopathies, patellofemoral syndrome, IT band, all the fun things that runners often have to deal with. And so we're going to make sure that we touch on those, as well as the specific injuries itself. We did do a poll and they were all popular, so we decided that we'll integrate talking about them all. And so Devin's going to start off specifically talking a little bit more about running mechanics.
So we spend a lot of time in running looking at like how much we run, how fast we run, but in distance running, the topic doesn't really revolve around how we run very often, but this is a big thing when it comes to injury prevention. So some common running mistakes that people make are overstriding, leaning backwards, and using their arms to run. And these are issues. Well, I'll start with overstriding. So if I'm running, and this often happens if I'm trying to run faster than I can without actually increasing my cadence, I'll kind of step out like this and then pull myself forward when I run. This obviously, as you can see, puts a lot of strain on my hamstrings in an elongated position, which is really hard for them, and increases my risk of hamstring strains and also Achilles tendinopathies, because that muscle is also under length as it hits the ground. Second common issue is leaning backwards. This happens when we're exhausted normally. So when we're really tired, we don't want to stay over our feet. We tend to kind of sit on our hips and just kind of jog forward. I'm exaggerating. And this is an issue because it places a lot of load on our lower backs as well. It elongates the front of our bodies while we're working it. So it causes issues with hip flexors and also with anterior compartment syndrome or like shin splint type injuries. The last issue we see a lot is people who overuse their arms. This is the person who runs with their elbows swinging out. You might also see shoulders hiking, or sometimes it ends up in a whip because that extra rotation from the upper body creates a counter rotation in the lower body. People, I've lost my train of thought here.
It happens when the projector shuts off.
My brain is reflecting what's going on in my brain right now. No. Sorry. Yeah. This is better. Yeah, thanks. Right. I've totally lost my train of thought. Sorry about that.
Okay, we'll move on to
Okay, thank you. So we also want to address lifestyle mistakes. And injury prevention has a lot to do with how we recover, not just with how we run. And so lots of things in our life affect how we recover: psychological stress, work stress, social issues, how we sleep, and also what we eat. We're just going to talk a little bit about sleep and eating. We're not psychologists. That's a really large topic to cover. So lack of sleep is a big one. So they found that people who got less than 7 hours of sleep for 2 weeks were about twice as likely to end up with a running related injury. So it's really important to make sure you're sleeping and getting your recovery in. When it comes to nutrition, we don't necessarily have any kind of nutrition recommendation other than you make sure you get enough calories in. This is huge because your body will first fuel your running, and second, it will fuel all your biological processes. So if you're not fueling accordingly, your body will start to reduce its protein synthesis, reduce its hormone regulation, lower your immunity, all sorts of cascading issues will arise. So it's really, really, really important that you fuel your activity and then you also get enough in for your basal needs, your everyday needs. Last kind of non-programming issue when it comes to injuries is your gear. I touched on the shoes, I'll get to that in a second. But layering is a big one. So if I'm running and I'm freezing, I'm going to be running tense. Also, if I have any other underlying like tightnesses, it'll just exacerbate that. So it's really important if you're out there running, layer up, be able to change layers efficiently if you can, to make sure that you stay relaxed and everything stays as loose as it can while you're running. Hydration. So this isn't such a big issue maybe this time of year where it's cool out. But when it's hot, letting yourself get dehydrated is a massive issue for cramping, so muscle strains. Or if it's hot out when you're really dehydrated, you can end up with some really bad kidney failure. This happened to a girl actually at Neenacker, I think 2 years ago. She got pulled off the course because she had kidney failure near the end of the race. So so really make sure that you keep on top of your hydration. If you're serious.
Nobody wants. So
it was a hot day. It was a hot day. Just carry water. Lastly, shoes. So I'm also not going to get into the big zero drop, high cushion, that shoe debate. But comes to injury prevention, because there's actually no research that supports one or the other in terms of injury prevention, enough to claim that one's better than the other. But what we do know is that having shoes that fit properly reduce your risk of injury. So making sure the length and the fit width, and that they also suit the type of running that you do. So if you're a toe striker versus heel striker, there are certain shoes that will support either one of those gaits. And it's important that you find the shoe that supports how you run. And lastly, we talked about that acute injury and the tread of your shoe. Make sure that you're wearing appropriate shoes for the conditions that you're in. So no runners on the North Shore in the rain, please. And also, don't wear your road runner or your trail runners, aggressive trail runners on cement, because the big lugs will actually create issues in your foot.
Trail shoes belong on the trail. Road shoes belong in the rain.
Thank you.
And you should only buy Arcteryx shoes because like they didn't pay us. That's true, unless you're in the trail. And a lot of it sounds really simple, but it's like those are the things. And as we transition into programming and as being kind of a fitness professional for the last 12 years, a lot of times people will be like, what should I eat? Or what exactly should I do? And a lot of what we need to be doing are just the basic things and getting into those habits, and just so you don't have to think about layers, they're just like already in your bag. And when it comes to hydration, you have these systems, because it is easy to not drink enough water, and it's really easy to not have an accessible layer to put on, and then you get uncomfortable and you cold and your muscles aren't reactive, and that's how part of injuries happen, and it's unfortunate. So that's like enough of us momming you with that stuff, and we'll get into a little bit more stuff in terms of programming. And when we're looking at programming as a whole, there's a lot that we could talk about. So I'm going to do my best to stay focused in general, and in my opinion, and not to generalize runners, but often when I talk to runners about what they do for strength, they don't necessarily have a structured program or any sort of strategy per se that they follow. And so what can happen is you might go to a random exercise class that, the program might be great, but, you're just dropping in and you didn't do anything to build up to that workout. Or maybe you go onto YouTube or you check out the Stronger Strides Instagram page, I don't know, to find these exercises that you're doing. But it's important to be able to piece it together because there is a strategy behind it. And I think that sometimes people will just jump into things with very good intention, and they aren't necessarily doing the wrong things, but it's how you piece it together that often is the magic behind it. And then the other thing with programming as a runner that we take in consideration is the whole year. If you are training for races, runners do typically have more of an off season and an on season, or they might be training for a particular race or races they care more about. And we want to do something called periodize. And periodization just means that we want our bodies to be in the most ideal and peak performance to be able to compete. And so when we're thinking of our program, and our run programming is similar to this, but when we're thinking about strength training, we want to make sure that we're maximizing what we're doing in different times of the season, that we can put it all together and actually have it serve us. So the what, the why, the how, and the when. So the what I kind of touched upon, but I thought of an analogy. I tend, when I don't understand things, to work well with analogies, but I don't know if this is going to maybe confuse you more or help you. But if you think of a house, and in a house that needs to be built, or so a house that doesn't exist, and you want to build a house, you're going to have components to put together the actual house. And so you've got your wood and cement as like your big foundational components that will put together the actual structure. And so if you think of that, but for the body, we're going to look at obviously bones, muscles, and I'm throwing movement in there, which kind of doesn't really relate to the house, but we're going to go with those things. So we've got muscles, bone, and movement. And then for a house, you're going to have something to start to put it together. So obviously glues, nails, and then eventually like an electrical system and insulation to make sure that this foundation has all the bits and pieces. And so with body, you kind of think of that as all your stability networks. And, when we think of stability, we have muscles. We also have a lot more supporting tissues other than muscles, but that's going to be part of like the glue and the nails. And then on the electrical components of like the nervous system. And so when you put together the house, you can eventually fine tune it and decorate it and design it and start to get a little bit more complicated with the intricate details. And the same thing can be kind of thought of with strength training. But if you don't have a foundation and then you just throw in like a single leg squat on a bow suit, and it's like, okay, that's not necessarily a bad exercise, questionable, but it's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't necessarily, you might not be ready for it. And so although it could be like a beautiful piece of solid wood, if you don't have the structure behind it, it doesn't necessarily work.
It's like putting out the wallpaper without the wall.
Yeah, exactly. I get it. So, and so when we're thinking of programming in that regard, know that there is a strategy that you can use to make the exercises perform well for you. And also too, in the design of the program is you don't necessarily have to feel crushed by strength training. And that was another point actually I was supposed to talk about, is that you don't want your strength training to compete with your running. And although in more off seasons or whatnot, we might be focusing on it a bit more, but we don't want it to compete. We want it to complement it. And so we need to think about, our recovery, as we talked about, and how we're structuring our weeks so that we have our strength training and our more important run days, which for runners are going to be our harder effort days, which I guess are the other days are important, but the harder effort days, which is typically tempo or track, and then our longer runs. And we need to make sure that our strength training is far enough away that we have enough recovery time. And not everyone is necessarily the same with this. And so you can experiment, but the point is that you want to be taking this into consideration when you're putting this together. And then when we're talking about particular exercises, there is a systematic way that you can progress exercises so that they can work more for you and not just feel like uncomfortable to do and make you feel kind of uncomfortable or sore after. Not all soreness is bad, but you don't need to feel sore for it to be productive that way. Yeah. Sorry, I'm very close to Zoom people. Hi, Zoom people. I keep forgetting you guys are there. Right. In terms of injury prevention, I was going to read this and I have to look at this. So for strength training and injury prevention, again, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, is a well-designed, thoughtful strength training program, because we're thinking of all these fundamental components and slowly building on it. That's what part of the reason why it's going to allow us injury prevention measures and allow us to have better potential balance, stability, utilization of muscles to perform for running. So improved joint positioning and posture, we have the ability, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about muscle balance next, but when we have our muscles balanced per se, we can, and we're strength training with postures that are ideal for running positions or just in strength training in general, then we're going to see this added benefit carry over in the rest of life and hopefully in running. And then enhanced neuromuscular control and coordination sounds kind of fancy, but when we think of muscles, that how they function is through the nervous system, and we need as we do something, we get better at it. And so if I have never squatted before, maybe I'll use a non-strength training example. If I've never kicked a soccer ball before, the first time I do it, it's going to feel kind of awkward. And from my experience kicking soccer ball, never being that great at it, it's going to feel awkward for a long time. But I trust that eventually, if you do it enough, it's going to feel more fluid and you develop a pattern. And that's kind of the nervous system serving you and your muscles to be able to become proficient and do something better and better. And that applies to running as well. And the benefit of strength training is we can manipulate you into doing specific things for a specific reason, whereas running is a bit more of a wild card. So when we think of neuromuscular control, we're thinking of improving these systems to to be able to move more efficiently or have our muscles activate in a larger area so that they can produce movement and performance better. Better muscle utilization for a given action. So they go hand in hand. So if I am climbing up a mountain and I don't have very strong glutes and I keep climbing up a mountain, I'm typically probably going to rely on what's the strongest in my body. The body likes to take the path of least resistance. So often people will be quad dominant. And so if I, in the gym, start to be able to do some glute exercises, build some neuromuscular control and some recruitment, and then do some strength exercises, then I go climb a mountain and now I feel my glutes working. And that's kind of like the beauty of strength training and how you can get it performing, and better load sharing and better overall resiliency in your performance, because then your quads aren't shot and you can use them for the downhill that you want to bomb at the end of the day or whenever. And then improved stability and supportive networks. And this will segue nice into muscular balance, but our muscles are obviously part of our stabilization system. And it would be nice that if we just did an exercise that our muscles that were supposed to work just worked. But unfortunately, because of some inherent postural issues that everyone has, and then postural issues because of sitting, and then there's contributing factors of sport and all these different things, we do tend to see muscular imbalances. And we want to make sure that we're not feeding them, kind of my example of the climbing uphill and using all your quads and not taking that group. This is a good example of that. So the nice thing about strength training, as I was saying, that we can manipulate you guys or your muscles into to working in a certain way. Let's keep drinking. And so we are going to specifically, you want to specifically target the muscles that are weak and the muscles that are tight and the muscles that might need length in certain positions. And you can do all this sort of stuff so that when you're running, you can have prevent the things that Devin talks about with running mechanics, this load sharing, but then also too, when you just, you know, as a runner, your strength, the strength of your muscles is what is producing overall power, force, and whatnot. So this is all going to stem from helping to address the muscular imbalances and then being able to slowly build on that.
Yeah. So like we can use the gym to contrive situations to strengthen what needs to be strengthened and help us move better versus while we're running, it's too complex to kind of break it apart. So we use the gym to kind of pull out the pieces and work on them.
And you don't necessarily, when you're running and you're focusing, especially if you're, you know, running a certain tempo or you're racing or you're running downhill, you know, maybe uphill is the one time that you can be thinking about, I'm going to try to use my glutes so I can save some quad strength or whatnot. But for the most part, you don't want to be thinking about those things. You want to be thinking about other things that you think about when you run. So we're going to get into a little bit more specific issues that we see with running. I mean, they're kind of a bit generalized in general, but and we're going to make you guys do some exercises.
So we're going to start with the feet and ankles. These are understandably probably one of the most important parts for a runner. Contrary to popular belief, the glutes are not the first thing that tires out or gets weak with runners. It's actually the calves and the soleus, the first thing that goes, especially in distance runners. So the ankles and feet are super important. Put up some things about that they have to support 11 times your body weight when you land. There's 30 different joints and I think over 100 different muscles in your foot. So they're extremely intricate and they demand and deserve a lot of our attention. And other than just being a site for a lot of injuries with runners, we always hear about like plantar fasciitis, shin splints, Achilles tendinopathies, you name it, right? People have all sorts of weird injuries with the foot, but the feet actually also contribute a lot to injuries up the chain. There's actually this great study in 2020 that looked up, I think it was like 120 runners or so, and those that did not do any kind of foot strengthening or control exercises had a 2.4 times more likelihood of getting any running related injuries. So that included stress fractures, hamstring strains, low back issues, herniated discs, as well as all the lower leg issues. So there's my little lecture, do your foot exercises.
And because everyone, let's be honest, like nobody does any foot or ankle work until you roll an ankle or like your physio tells you to do something, because it's like, they're not the most exciting things to do as compared to other exercises we think they're exciting. But point be told is they do make a big difference and maybe give you that competitive edge.
All right, so how do we know if you have good control of your feet? So we're gonna go through a couple of exercises with you. If people on Zoom, you don't have an excuse not to take your shoes off and do this. You guys, I understand we're in a public space, you might not want to. I'm going to.
Let's do it. Come on. Everyone's wearing masks anyways, so.
Can't smell our feet.
Yeah. Okay, so we have two different exercises.
So the first one is to see if you have control over your soleus. So most people know whether they have control over gastroc. That's when your knees are straight. Can you go up on your toes? Most people can do that.
Yeah, everyone get up, try.
Yeah. So if your knees are straight, now we're working your gastroc. One thing to think about when you are going up on your toes is, are you going up to the ball of your big toe or are you rolling out to the outside edge of your foot? I can't even balance like that, but just with your hand. So if we're going on the outside edge, we're actually not utilizing the main muscle in the back, the gastroc to the soleus. You're actually relying either just on your ligaments on the outside of your ankle or maybe your peroneal. So for your soleus, same thing, but you want to bend your knees And can you rise up high into the ball of your foot, keeping your knees bent without driving your knees forward or straightening your leg out or rolling out to the outside edge of your foot again.
It's like how we gave you alcohol and now I'm making you do balance exercises.
Also touch your nose, tap your head. So this is hard for you, then maybe your soleus needs a little bit of attention. Also, if your toes tend to grab the floor, if you end up puckering like in that last knuckle of the toe, that's another sign that your soleus isn't working and you're using one of your toe flexors to help you stabilize that position. Very good. It might be. I don't know much about yoga, to be honest.
Right.
I've done that in yoga.
We're going to do toe yoga, which I don't know if they do in yoga, but we're calling it toe yoga. That's what we're going to do next.
It's a toe exercise, and this is just so you have control over your toes independently. So your toes and then your big toe, and then your other toes together. So there's muscles that control all those toes together, but your big toe is separate. So can you keep your big toe down and lift up all your other toes? And then can you do the opposite? Place your other toes down, lift up your big toe again without puckering at that little knuckle.
And this is how we decide who gets the prizes. So you should put these in that.
So this is difficult for you, like if you find that you have to roll out a little bit to assist that big toe, or if you find that when you're lifting your other toes, it's kind of bending to lift up, or you find that your big toe is bending to help support them. Same thing when you lift your big toe, if your other toes are grabbing again, or any kind of rolling through the foot to assist this action, it probably means that you need some help with some strength and mobility control in the foot. And that's spending a little bit of time doing even just this or other toe exercises is a great place to start. Right. Not specifically. So this is just these two exercises just to see how the control of your feet and toes are. For shin splints, so anything with anterior compartment issues, that could be weakness in the soleus. So you're not strong when you strike the ground, or it could be that issue with leaning back I talked about earlier. So when you hit the ground, the anterior of the body is long as it takes load. That could be another issue for shin splints. It could be wrapping up your activity too fast. There's so many reasons you could
I always think shin splint is the reality anterior, and it's always that big toe that's always striking up. So that's why I was asking.
right. So if you have issues with hip flexion, this motion, our toes will actually end up trying to help with hip flexion. They'll lift up, which does tighten the muscles in the anterior of the leg, which can also contribute to shin splints. That's actually a hip issue usually. If the hip has a hard time flexing, the toes sit. So yeah, there's about 6 or 7 or 8 different reasons why you can develop shin splints. But yeah, weak feet are one of them. That's it for the, yeah, you guys have a seat unless you want to stay standing.
Often with toe and footwork is, especially with toe work, is you will find it's hard, and sometimes mentally you understand what we're saying, but it's hard to actually get the movement to occur. But that is part of that neuromuscular control where you have to think about it, you have to practice it, and sometimes you can do a little bit of assistance with your hand. But over time it will develop, and it takes consistency of practice to be able to get better at it. So, and that kind of goes with exercises in general. Is if you don't have any consistency with strength training, then it's going to be really hard for you to reap the benefits of strength training, because you don't give your body the opportunity to improve. And so we want to get good at certain things. We want to get good at toe yoga. So the next thing we want to talk about is lower back pain, which lower back pain affects the population at large. It can be especially problematic with runners. Obviously, some of the mechanisms that Devin's talked about with the stride mechanics. Often, if you're doing a lot of uphill climbing, especially under fatigue, that bent over position that we have our backs in can also just be really, really hard on our backs. In general, what can happen is everyone, when we think of low back pain, they're like, well, I don't have a strong enough core, which is true, but it's, our abdominal muscles are important, but it's this integration of the deeper abdominal muscles and how they function with other stabilizing muscles in movements. And that's what, we want to ensure that we're addressing when we're looking at the low back. The other thing is, if our legs aren't strong, then our tendency to not be able to hold good posture is going to be a problem, and for us to have to use our backs is going to become a problem as well. So that whole joint positioning that we're talking about, as well as just compensation, will occur. And so with low back, there's a plethora of low back issues that we have, that generally speaking, you want to make sure that you are doing core exercises. And core exercises, kind of one note on that, is you don't necessarily need to feel burning in your abdominal region to be working your core. And often, it's not wrong to feel any sort of fatigue in your midsection when you're doing a core exercise, but be cautious of chasing that. When we're working on stability systems, we want to be able to hold positions for a really, really long time. And it can often be a little bit more low level, the stability. So sometimes it's your joint awareness and your postural positioning, and being able to hold that against some sort of resistance is going to serve you a lot more benefit, especially if you're dealing with a low back issue, rather than doing something that feels very fatiguing in the core, because the technique is going to be very, very, very important. So we want to make sure we are doing stability exercises that strengthen the trunk, as well as lateral hip stability and glute strength, to ensure that our pelvis is being stabilized, as well as the stride mechanics, we are working optimally. And then the leg strength is going to be another really, really important thing of the main things. And then obviously, if you're rounding out your program, we will have the other components as foot strength and mobility in that regard. Next are cranky knees. Cranky knees are the next topic, and knees are. There was actually, well, I just thought of this now, but in terms of knees and running, is always like, I can't run because of my knees, is like a lot of people say. But did you know the study that just came out that I talked about how running isn't as hard on joints?
Yeah.
I can't cite it or quote it because it just was more in a couple different news platforms. But in any event, is knees do take a lot of stress, and they can be under a lot of stress with running per se. But typically, the problem isn't the knees; it's what's happening above and below it. And if we don't have adequate stability in our foot and mobility in our ankle, what's happening below the knee can be causing stress to the knee on impact. And with running, this is especially important if you are doing a lot of volume and whatnot. And then above the knee, we're looking at hip stability. And when we come into planning position, or we're in any moment of single leg, if we don't have proper hip stability, then our knees can take the load and stress and the positioning. And one or two times might be fine, but over time we can see these issues occur. Or sometimes it could just be you don't have kind of the proper stability at the hip, and your ankle is a little bit weak, and so then that network in itself is going to be faulty, and so you might be more likely to then have your knee go out of position and potentially strain the ligaments, or fall or whatnot, to do something to actually injure the knee. So it's one of those things where there's layers of issues that stem, and when we're thinking of knee issues, we want to make sure that we're removing the things that irritate it, and that's really, really important in my experience dealing with knees. And then doing what we can to stabilize and strengthen below and above. And then there is something to be said about just building better muscular balance of the legs in general, so that we're not seeing a lot of excessive tightness in one area versus the next, because that can create some stress at the knee joint itself and how the patella tracks and whatnot. And then the muscles do provide stability for the knee, especially if you have had strains to your ligaments and whatnot. We're going to rely more on the muscular system to stabilize the knee. So those are all really, really, really important. And the last thing I want to say about that is just taking care of the soft tissue when it comes to that, and being able to, make sure that you're not, if you're feeling an irritation, try not to let it get really, really bad. So it's where, you're using your own mechanisms, or you're seeking out, help from a therapist. And then, but I think the most important thing is realizing, like, you're having excessive tension that's causing a little bit of discomfort underneath. Why is that happening? And then kind of everything you learned today is there's probably some sort of imbalance happening that you could probably just address through corrective exercises and some strength, and just being consistent with it, and all your problems will go away.
And your cranky knees won't turn angry.
Yeah. Cranky knees will just,
So moving on up from the knees to hips and hamstrings. So this is a big issue with runners. Specifically, usually it's that like high hamstring, bottom of the glute pain that runners often get. But this can also be top of the glute, side of the glute, front of the hip, all sorts of pain and issues that runners experience. And they're, depending on the injury or the pain, there's obviously a whole host of reasons why this could be happening, just like with the shin splints example. But I think the main takeaways in this are that we need to make sure that certain muscles are long and strong, not just long and weak, and not just strong and short. We have a strong pelvic floor, so that's not core like this, that's actual pelvic floor, so your inner, deeper, lower core muscles, and that you train the whole glute. So for the hamstrings and hip flexors, we often do like this kind of thing to strengthen the hamstrings, so we keep them short and strong, or the quads, this sort of thing where you use that leg extension thing, or for squats, which are great, but they all work the muscles as they get shorter. Now with running, we actually keep fairly long when we're running, and the muscles get short when they're at a load. This is not very hard. I don't need massively strong hamstrings in order to bring my heel to my leg, but I do need a strong long hamstring to support my body over my foot at foot strike. So making sure that we strengthen the hamstrings, and same thing with the hip flexors. They're straight as I pull my leg through. They need to be strong in this position because this is not hard. We need to strengthen these muscles when they're in the long position. So like glute bridges where your legs are straight versus bent, RDLs where you kind of keep your knees fairly straight, so you stress the hamstrings under length, hip flexors, cable pulls where your leg is straight, things like that. Pelvic floor. So Andrea really touched on this well earlier, and that's the core exercise without feeling the core. So making sure that your low ribs, when you're doing your core exercises, are in line with your pelvis, so your diaphragm is actually creating pressure on the pelvic floor, which is what stimulates it, and not going so hard that you need to use all these accessory ab muscles in order to support. So like if you're doing like a dead bug, so you're on your back, your feet are in the air.
dead bugs, right?
You guys know what dead bugs are? Yeah, yes. You're on your back, legs are in the air. Often people, they'll get prescribed something simple, like your feet are on the ground, you lift one leg, you lift the other leg. Then they get home, like, well, that feels easy. So I'm now going to bring both my legs up and my arms, and I'm going to extend everything out. Okay, now I feel a burn. Well, you're probably actually now not engaging your pelvic floor anymore. You're probably just using all of your big ab muscles to control that movement, which is not really what we want to do when we're trying to support our pelvis, or not all we want to do. Another great study is they study all these sedentary people versus CrossFitters, and took a look at who had better pelvic floor engagement, and the sedentary people actually had better pelvic floor engagement than the CrossFitters for that very reason. It's true. Not hating on CrossFitters, that was just the study.
I think it's wrong. There's a time and place for various different exercises. Like if you, want to do certain exercises for other reasons, but part of the purpose is like knowing why you're doing the exercises and how you're putting it together. And you can't do all the exercises always. So, there might be a time and a place where you have to do the bent knee hamstring work to get your hamstring muscles a little bit stronger because you're disconnected and you need that. And that's okay. So it's not like when you see a runner doing that, that's necessarily bad, but we want to make sure that, in these positions that we know runners are prone to injury, that we're not neglecting that and we're being strategic with how we're integrating that into their programming.
Exactly. Which brings me to the glutes. So runners get a lot of flack for having weak glutes, the glutes that don't turn on or things like that, which is fine. And then they get prescribed things like clamshells or like mini band walks all the time just to work that lateral hip. But it's actually really important to work the entire glute. So we have muscles in our glute that do this, that rotate us and that extend us. We need to work all those kinds of motion. Just working this is not going to cut it. So things like deadlifts, once we get stronger, things like single leg deadlifts are a great way to make sure that you're hitting all aspects of the glute. And perfect, screen's off.
All right, so to kind of wrap things up, ending on butt, we wanted to, obviously, like, we just threw a lot of different information, and it's kind of like, okay, now how would I like put it together? And so some key takeaways I think that you can apply, you know, starting tomorrow or tonight if you're a keener, is having a strategy and being systematic and being consistent. Again, to circle back, if you're not being consistent with anything, you're not going to see those results. So picking, you know, maybe a few exercises, or, you know, sticking with one program and trying it for a period of time, and you know, you should, or we recommend that you structure your programming in blocks. And if any of you work with endurance coaches, it's very much the same, or if you've downloaded programs, the way they set up a run schedule is similar to how you can set up a strength program. And typically, you know, it might be twice a week, or if you are working through an injury, you might have to do certain exercises a little bit more often, but you will develop a routine and a habit with them, and it doesn't have to take a long time. So making sure that you have kind of that consistency and structure with strength training, in my opinion, and our opinion, will give you a lot more benefit than just doing that random stuff that, you know, might seem a little bit more exciting. Doing the boring exercises that don't feel hard, I guess, is what we've really, another one of our takeaways. But in terms of understanding the why and the purpose behind it, is, again, you'll benefit from it in your performance, and overall, as you progress your strength work, you can there's a time and a place for that.
And yeah, it was something that you said earlier, just make sure you do little things well. So recover well, sleep, eat, all those little things. Yeah, I think that was another big point. Just make sure you stay on top of the little things.
The easy things. You don't need this like really complicated program. And I mean, Instagram is kind of guilty, because it's like you get more attention when you do things that are like more exciting and seem exciting. You're like, hey, we're just going to do these really boring things well, you know.
Show you.
Yeah. And so, but there's something to be said about that. And, you know, and I think when you look at really disciplined athletes that have a lot of success, it's because they've gone out of their way to do the little things well. And then it's more simple. So yeah, so we're going to open up questions. I think you guys get first dibs questions. I don't actually know, but I'm going to say that because I don't know where any of the questions are on Zoom.
I think we'll start with in-person questions, and then those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to drop a question in the chat if you have one. But yeah, we can open it up to the floor here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I see people run the biking pole. How do you run the biking pole?
Oh yeah, let's practice. There is a technique to it. I don't have hiking poles here to show you. You kind of use them kind of like a cross-country ski pole. If any of you guys have cross-country skied. Yeah.
Instagram post.
Yeah.
I was actually wrong. So we were running together in the Rockies this year, and she's like, why do you use your poles like that? And I was like, what do you mean? And then I was like, she's like, well, have you ever tried this way? I was like, oh no. And then I was like, it's so much easier. So it does make a difference.
Yeah, so you use the strap like a cross-country ski pole. And depending on how steep the terrain is or how fast you want to go, it differs slightly. Like if I'm on a super steep hill, I have the straps around and I do two hands with one step, kind of like, do you guys watch cross-country skiing or skate skiing or anything like that? If anyone does, it's kind of like the okay, well, it's kind of like how you'd go up a hill with your skate skiing. You have two hands with one big step. If it's less steep and I'm kind of running it, then I can use it more like running arms. And it's kind of a light tap. I don't lean on them. It's a light tap, and then I kind of push it back.
So you of them tap together and then speak forward, or you can interchange with, let's say, right pull and then left right forward.
Yeah, so depending on the steepness of the terrain, that will vary. So if I'm running up less steep but still an incline, I'll use them more like running arms, or I'll alternate the left and the right arm. And the steeper it gets, then I need more power, and I'll use two at once. So yeah, it depends on the terrain and your comfort.
Upper arm, over the.
Legs is, the arms is a little bit. It's not very much. I'm not leaning on the poles ever. I mean, if I'm like running and there's like a little stream I want to get across, sure, yeah, then I totally do that. I plant them and I jump across them. But
But keep in mind, if you are running and you're using poles, you can actually be exerting more because you have now, it can be more work. The idea with poles is that they become more efficient to help preserve your legs. But then at the same time, if you're putting too much effort in your arms and you're running, then you can become a little bit more fatigued, especially if you're using them in a race. So definitely experiment with them in your training runs so that you can understand like how much pressure to use and the different angles and whatnot.
So now, how about going downhill when you don't run? How do you do that?
I hold them in my hands. I never,
yeah, don't.
yeah, I find I just trip.
Yes.
You lean forward.
Yeah, use my legs. Yeah, I'll carry. Yeah. If it's rolling terrain mostly down, I'll carry them with two hands. And if I need to get help on a little up, I'll just swing them forward, pop them in, pop up the hill, carry them again. Or I'll just carry two in one hand if I know it's just downhill for a long time.
So what would you recommend
It would probably depend on the why you're getting. So I would offer a different solution during the run depending on what was causing it. But yeah, you don't want to be running through that kind of burning pain. I would stop and walk and go and address the issue.
You can play around with your intensity because sometimes like there is a phenomenon with shin splints that you just kind of have to like run more, but not through the pain. So sometimes you might have gone out too fast where you're not, certain muscles aren't warm enough and you don't have enough room for expansion in that section. So sometimes people can have pain for that reason. You know, maybe you had really tight feet muscles going into it, so your foot mechanics are off. You know, there's lots of different things. Sometimes it's just footwear, depending on what what terrain you're on or how old your shoe is or what your foot does. So there's lots of different things, but I think in general, not usually just running through pain is like it runners all the time. It doesn't, it usually just gets worse. You do learn your body and knowing like, oh, this usually will go away a bit, but I think generally playing around with the intensity and then trying to figure out the why, because there is a reason it's happening.
Yeah, getting a functional diagnosis, they call it. So someone like a physio will be able to hopefully offer you like what's wrong mechanically, and then you can address that. And yeah, I wouldn't run through burning. Oh, in road shoes. In road shoes.
Yeah, you run in the rain all the time.
I run in the rain all the time. Yeah, I run in the rain, just not in road shoes.
It's just slippery and you can fall very easily.
Oh yeah, no, that was just that. Don't wear your road shoes to run in the rain on the.
No Nike Freeze.
No Nike Freeze. No Metcons.
Like, more like contact on the road where they were in trails doing the race. That's like a lot for tire dirt.
Do you mean road shoes on the road or road shoes on the trail?
On the road.
That's fine. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. We were talking about road shoes on the trails in the North Shore. It's got to be more specific.
Yeah.
On the trails in the North Shore.
I mean, road shoes on the trail in general is probably not a good idea, but in the rain is even worse. So if you are gonna,
but you were right. Yes,
Yeah.
on the road,
totally, and that's
in the
fine.
rain, wear your road shoes. Don't wear your trail shoes, and vice versa.
My actual question, what's like range of skill levels are like great.
Cool. Okay, personally, everything. Like I have athletes in the Olympics for the 1500, 5000 meter, and the 50K race walk, and learn to run. So the gamut, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know which one do you exert more effort in terms of burning calories, running uphill or running downhill? It's the same distance.
Uphill.
Uphill, you exert more energy.
Yeah. Your VO2 max is higher, your heart rate will be higher. Yeah.
I always thought going downhill, you use actually more muscle to stabilize, so you don't onboard fall.
I think your question though was different. Your question was which uses more calories. So which implies where is your heart rate higher? your heart rate is higher going uphill. Your muscles, you have to work very hard stabilizing downhill because they're under long length, but your heart rate generally is lower. So you're not burning as much energy. But yes, your muscles are going through a lot of damage. They're just different, hard in different ways.
More stressful downhill. It can add more stress to the muscle and also have to require more recovery time after, especially if your legs aren't used to it or your muscles in your legs aren't used to it, versus uphill. It's the type of muscle contractions that occur.
So this is a real question now for me. So given a choice, to always go running downhill, that is take the gondola up and then just run down, gondola up or down, would I actually get more strength training versus someone who just keeps running uphill, take gondola down?
You can't really use running to strength train per se. You're going to use running to specifically for adaptations for your running performance, but strength training, although you use your leg muscles with running, you're using them in a way that is very specific to the running form. And so you're not utilizing the muscles and their full ranges of motion as getting as much muscle activation and that kind of overall balance and structure that we talked about.
So you need both because they work different parts in the muscle in different ways. So you would be stronger at running downhill than the person who only went uphill, but you would not be as strong as the person going uphill. Does that make sense? It's very specific.
Thank you.
It doesn't seem like we have any questions on Zoom. Does anyone need to have 2 more questions? Oh, 3 more questions? Okay, cool.
Did I have to eat water after the run?
Stretchings are really tricky one. So if you're not already tight or experiencing an issue, then I wouldn't stretch in general, especially for running. We don't want to make the muscles long and weak, which is typically what stretching does. Now, if you have something that's super tight and that you know is an issue that you know you need to mobilize, I would do both before and after. Do you have a different answer or an input?
Because I think if you have like exactly if you have areas that you know are specifically restrictive before running, it can be helpful to provide relief and activation. And so for me, I do have some areas, or if I'm doing strength training programs, I might lengthen certain muscles to better activate ranges of motion of others, which can be beneficial in my experience. But one of the things, like she said, is you can create too much length, or kind of circling back, there's a reason why your muscles are tight. And that could be serving your running performance for some people, but also too, it could be protecting something else. And so then if you just go and stretch and then you go and run, it's probably just going to tighten back up immediately and you've wasted your time. Otherwise, it might be serving a purpose that's stabilizing. So I think general movement is good because we do want to promote tissue health that way. But doing tons of stretching and then going and running, or running and then doing tons of stretching, might not necessarily be as beneficial as it could be. Yeah.
Things like Pilates, like that, you get down to that, you not go out the gym and
so the yoga comment was just that I don't know yoga. I think they all serve a purpose, and especially if the person gets some sort of psychological benefit from the exercise, I think it's hugely beneficial. But yeah, it definitely depends on what you're trying to train. I wouldn't say you get really strong, like using water as resistance. Now, running, we don't need to be crazy strong, but if we're having a hard time, maybe activating certain movements or learning certain movements, it might not be enough resistance to really change much.
but I guess more.
Do you mean like flexibility, mobility?
Yeah,
if you need it, for sure. I would say though, so everyone's individual. I feel like if someone feels like they get a benefit from doing something like Pilates where they get strong and long, then that's fantastic. You're not getting elasticity in the sense of like jumping gives you elasticity or bouncing gives you elasticity of the tendons, but you are getting strong and long, which is which can help people a lot. Yeah, so I think if it works for you, it's definitely go for it.
And I think kind of to add to that is anything that you're going to be consistent with. If somebody's, we have this beautiful strength training program, but if you're not going to do it, then it's not going to help you. But if you do some consistent strength training in the water, it's going to be more beneficial than not. But in terms of resistance, you do need, our bodies will adapt to resistance. And so we need to make sure that we're challenging, and you can either do that by adding more resistance, which is easy to do in a gym, modifying the tempo, or changing the reps. And so there's only so many different ways that we can continue to add stimulus stress to produce strength. And so that's another kind of reason why we might choose some methods over others.
For myself personally, I find out like the lower back pain is definitely something that sets in like after like 12, 13, 14K, and like once we start treading into 20, that's probably like I don't often break 20. That's like usually hard to cut off for me. So I guess is that something in combination for like strength training for the back, and then also like accommodating posture, because I find when I do get into like the later kilometers, like I do start to notice like that sloping way back and the kind of shrinking into my lower back and doing that pressure. Is that something like I said, or just like kind of like a mental note to just like correct the posture like as you're going there, like what kind of like tips or suggestions do you have? And now once we start jumping into like higher 10, 15, 20, 25, breaking those like larger distance barriers.
Yeah, I would probably incorporate some speed work or strides into some of the shorter runs where you learn to carry your body forward over your foot and get a little bit stronger in that leaning forward position. So when running slow, it's really hard to, or it's harder to kind of keep our bodies forward. It's easier to kind of sit back. So adding like, I don't know, 100-meter strides, things where you're working fast, you're not sprinting all out, but you're working hard enough that you have to bring your body forward in order to move quickly, can help teach that technique and kind of adding more of those into more runs until that becomes more of a habitual running pattern or gait for you. It's really hard to change in the middle of a run.
Like when you're already tired and you have compensation, like our bodies, you might think like, feel is not technically real. You might think that you have this beautiful form, but the underlying mechanisms and the muscle loading and all that sort of stuff, how you're carrying that out, it's probably not what you think. And often people will over exaggerate, and then you end up with another host of issues. So you might, posture is a good one. People are like, don't flip, and I do this. Like that's not good either. So it's a bit of a.
Yeah, so I'd start by keeping the runs within that pain threshold. So cutting them off at that 14, adding in strides, and seeing if you can build upon that.
And like reducing distance, but including the turns, so more like higher intensity 5 to 10, that kind of like inclusion in terms of shorter distance striding.
Yeah, exactly. And then seeing if then, you can do a 13K run with no issues. And then a few later, maybe you can do a 15K run with no issues, and seeing if that sort of gradually you can keep that same good form. I'd still keep the strides only to those shorter runs, but then on the long run, gradually see if you can start to push the distance after a few weeks of including strides.
We have a question from Zoom. I'm seeing two questions now.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Mobility versus stretching, what's more important?
Well, I guess it's making sure we understand the difference between mobility versus stretching. So when we refer to mobility, it's usually having strength and control in a maximal range of motion. And so that's different than stretching, where we're just trying to get as much length out of the muscle as possible. So I would say that I think Devin and I both agree that we want to emphasize more on mobility and functional mobility as opposed to stretching.
Oh, thank you. And then another question on Zoom right now. I have heard that heavy lifting. One question. Heavy lifting weights is beneficial for women 50+ years old. Will that help prevent injury?
Yeah, so anyone over the age of 40, but especially as we hit 50, 60, 70, we do see a muscle loss. So sarcopenia is going to happen, and it accelerates after the age of 70. And so kind of back to my point of resistance training is, you know, heavy lifting, and that's relative. You know, somebody who's not trained and just goes and starts lifting really, really heavy, but everything is heavy is not necessarily gonna benefit them per se. We want to build up to it, but you can see a benefit from injury prevention because you're going to develop more functional strength, more muscle mass, and bone density.
Okay, one more question on Zoom, and then I think that's all the time we have for questions. So in addition to strength training that focuses on hips and glutes, is it advised and or beneficial to run through chronic hamstring tightness?
Wait, tightness or pain? Yeah, I'd like clarification on tightness or pain. Because if, yeah, you're tight and you're running okay and it's not painful, I would say you can continue running. If it's painful, I would say you can continue running within, as long as the pain doesn't, or the tightness doesn't change to pain. That long length hamstring strength work should help.
And yeah, just be mindful of why is that tightness happening, and you know, and is it becoming worse, and is it worse at certain times of your run, and paying attention to those things, because again, there's going to be a reason behind that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I think I'm pretty sedentary at the moment, so it's cool to know that maybe my pelvic floor muscles don't need as much work as I thought. No. But also, yeah.
So if you just read down the answers, if someone's going from like 0 to like to 5K right now, what are like the basic say? I mean, I would say top 3 for them to do right now, just to get their length going and into proper running.
Me, like exercise, strength exercises.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with straight and bent kneecap raises. That's what I'm taking.
Okay.
I would say some sort of kind of dying bug exercise would be like a core exercise. Yeah.
And I mean, I love deadlift / single leg deadlift to work that whole route that we talked about. That obviously requires a little bit of technique. But you can just do the body weight if it's a new exercise for you, just to teach that hip motion and hip hinge, and that will still, if it's completely new to you, might even still activate the hips a little bit.
Like ideally, we'd like 5 exercises if we had 3. That was
I cheated on that 4. I give 2 already.
and then I, you know, typically like some sort of squat pattern, I do find to be beneficial, because you're going to integrate core. You will get some muscle in the front of your body, back of your body. And just in terms of joint positioning, I think you can work a lot with that. So
Deadlift, squat, calf raises, easy, dying bucks. There we go.
and then yeah, our 5th exercise would probably be some sort of pulling, upper body pulling, like a row rowing exercise.
I think that's an inside joke.
All right. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free to give Stronger Strides a follow. You're at Stronger Strides.
In general, give it a Stronger Strides _ on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have a really exciting new product coming out, which, you know, kind of puts everything together if you're kind of confused about, you know, where to start or what exercises you can do.
We get so excited talking about this stuff. We're like, oh yeah, so we are launching our program that we've spent a lot of time putting together. And so we have 2 different avenues: Stronger Strides Strength and Stronger Strides Home. And so, Stronger Strides Gym and Stronger Strides Home. And so obviously one is done if you have access to a gym and weights, and the other one if you have minimal equipment and you're going to be doing them at home. Both of the programs are periodized over a year. They're released in phases. And we are offering everyone a discount. We have a pre-sale. The official program start date is November 1st. And but we have a pre-sale going on until then. I think you said 15% off of our early bird, which is $22.95 per month, and then we have a yearly membership as well.
So will there be a promo code for that I can send everyone or?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, our store isn't up yet.
Yeah.
Our website is up and running, strongerstrides.com, but our store is not up and running yet. So when that'll get fixed and finished, then
Oh yeah, so we have a pre-sale form, so you just have to fill that out and then,
we'll contact you.
We will, is there a link to that form?
yeah, we can send that to you.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
on the
I can
website too.
send all the details out via email for everyone who RSVP'd. And then you'll all get access to that discount code and try out the new product.
And then you can also pick, we have 5 rehab modules. We have ones we talked about, and we also have a shoulder module. And so we're also giving 15% in the module of your choice if you have a low back issue or a knee issue or ankle issue that you wanted specifically. So we'll make sure to include that as well.
So I think that's everything from us on Zoom. So we'll just thank everyone here on Zoom. We're gonna sign off. I just didn't want to be like a talking voice on the screen. But yeah, if you are on Zoom, you will be entered into the draw that we will do tomorrow. And then those of us in store, we're gonna do the draw after we sign off. Yeah, so thanks to everyone on Zoom. We're gonna log off now. Oh, there's lots of people saying thank you. Lots of messages coming in. All right, catch you later.